The Trump administration is bringing back forced institutionalization as part of its eugenics agenda. Earlier this month, the Department of Justice published an opinion telling states that they could ignore years of legal precedent and start locking up disabled people instead of paying for them to be cared for in their community. This memo is part of an effort to roll back Olmstead, the 1999 Supreme Court ruling that determined it was discrimination to force disabled people into institutions. This is definitely not about budgets because it costs a lot more money to lock people away than it does for them to get care at home. According to Bloomberg Law, the person behind this policy was Stephen Miller. The details have come from sources that don't want to go on record because they're afraid of their job, and that's understandable. But there have been multiple sources saying this. So even though the White House and Stephen Miller themselves are denying it, it still makes a lot of sense because it lines up a lot with their general policies and the things that they say. It also aligns with an executive order last summer that pressured states to put homeless people into involuntary confinement. If these policies are advanced, the country could bring back brutal facilities like Willowbrook, a state school in Staten Island that became the face of the industry. The conditions there were terrible. Like, they didn't take care of the kids at all, and they're essentially locked in a prison where they're treated probably worse than prisoners are in this country, which is really bad. And they were also treated like lab rats and used in cruel experiments. They even injected these kids with hepatitis. Oddly enough, RFK's dad actually toured the place. I think it was in the 70s or in the 60s, 1965. And he said that people were living in conditions that were worse than zoo animals. And now this seems to be the kind of thing that RFK would sign off on nowadays. And actually, I think his aunt was lobotomized or something like that. So, you know, even though his father went on record saying that, the family's history with mental health is still not great. Willowbrook wasn't alone either. That was just the most infamous place. It was like that all over the country. Pennhurst, not too far from here in Pennsylvania, was run the same way. And it was ultimately a case against Pennhurst where the Supreme Court decision was made. Willowbrook was the most famous facility in the U.S., though, and this is mostly because of a 1972 report on it by, surprisingly, Geraldo Rivera. After the conditions inside that place were shown on TV, there was a wave of lawsuits from around the country, and public opinion turned on institutionalization. This is all a part of this administration's wider plan to cleanse the country of anybody that they see as undesirable or not like them. This includes their political enemies, immigrants, disabled people, gay and trans people, homeless people. And the target list will expand, I'm sure, as time goes on. There are tons of different stories popping up almost every day where you can tell that there is a concerted effort across the government to implement this philosophy that drives many in the Trump administration. Just a few days before the disability memo was published, the Department of Education announced it was handing off its responsibilities for special education to the Department of Health and Human Services, which is under the control of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Last year, RFK said all that crazy about autistic people. Not the Tylenol thing, that's also crazy, but the fact that they will never pay taxes, hold a job, and then went down a longer list saying they will never play baseball, write a poem, go on a date, like crazy. Obviously, many of us do these things. There's also been concerns that RFK has wanted to create an autism registry. Also last year, the director of the NIH admitted that they were going to create a registry. And then when there was all this backlash, they said, oh no, it's just a real data platform. They didn't change anything about the mechanics of it, of course. It's still a registry. They just called it something different. The idea that runs through all of this is eugenics. The idea that some people are better than others because of their genes or because of the bodies that they're in, and that people who express characteristics that those in power do not like are seen as less desirable or, less worthy people. And there is, in these cases, an effort to cut off as many services and as much help to those people as possible because they are seen as somehow infecting the gene pool. And this is why they don't want immigrants either. Of course, the Nazi regime is the most popular advocate of eugenics, but they actually got many many of their ideas from the United States. And it was a thing here for a very long time before it was in Nazi Germany. Madison Grant wrote this racist book a long time ago, which, was one of Hitler's inspirations. And then there's, of course, Jim Crow, but there was forced sterilization as well. The United States was actually one of the modern pioneers of forced sterilization. In 1927, there was a Supreme Court ruling that actually upheld the government's right to forcibly sterilize people that they saw as feeble-minded, which really could mean anything. And the woman who was the subject of that Supreme Court ruling, let me see the name if I could find it. It was Bell versus Buck. And Carrie Buck was the name of the woman. And she apparently did not have any developmental disabilities or anything like that. And of course, even if she did, it was totally wrong to sterilize her. But just the broad description of feeble-minded really allowed them to just grab up anybody. So then after that ruling, there were at least 70,000 forced sterilizations in this country until they stopped doing it. And I'm pretty sure that the only reason that they stopped doing it was because of the Nazis and because, they ended up on the opposite side of the U.S. in that war. There was also the Immigration Act of 1924, which created the National Origins Quota System. And this basically made it so it was more difficult for people from certain countries to get over here and easier from other countries. And usually it was people with whiter complexion who had an easier time getting here. There was a guy named Harry Laughlin back in the 1920s who was a very prominent eugenicist in the United States and had a lot of political influence. He also testified in front of Congress that people of certain nationalities are more likely to be insane or feeble-minded. These policies were later adopted and taken to further extremes in Nazi Germany. Laughlin actually bragged that his model of sterilization laws shaped the 1935 Nuremberg racial hygiene laws, and Hitler had already praised the 1924 immigration quotas in Mein Kampf, holding America up as a country that agreed with him. The Rockefeller Foundation poured money into German eugenics through the 1920s, funding the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute and a variety of other programs connected to the German eugenics establishment. Many other corporations and wealthy families donated to the Nazi regime at the time as well, including the Fords and the Bushes, among many others. But this was specifically for the purpose of eugenics. And don't get me wrong, the other investments are really bad and really suspicious too. And many of them did invest in the Nazi Party because they agreed with their political mission. But many of those Rockefeller donations were specifically for the purpose of eugenics research. As I wrote about in my Substack, there were even American eugenicists who were complaining that the Germans were beating us at our own game. This was like in the 1930s and 30s. They were saying that we were falling behind in eugenics and that we needed to adopt more of the extreme policies that were being advanced in Germany. There was also Nazi propaganda before there was a direct conflict where they had posters that said, "We do not stand alone," with like imagery of the United States with them. Then at the Nuremberg trials, something that we don't often hear is the fact that they actually tried to use that as a defense and say that we got many of these ideas from the United States. They even pointed to the Buck v. Bell decision and used that as a precedent and said that, hey, you did this stuff too. They weren't wrong either. I mean, there may not have been death camps in the U.S. If you don't count the founding of the country, of course, and slavery. But at this time in particular, there were concentration camps where people were being held for just being immigrants, especially Japanese people in particular. But people of many different nationalities were targeted. And I think that is one of the things that people don't realize, and they think that the bad thing about the Nazi regime was the death camps. And yes, that was bad. But the implication that many people get is that it doesn't become Nazi until the death camps are here. and that you're not allowed to look at all the warnings as the death camps are coming and as they're building them and as they're the things that might turn into death camps. You're not supposed to say anything about it until they're gassing people. It doesn't really make much sense, that perspective, because how are we supposed to learn anything from history? And then the odd thing about that Buck versus Bell decision is that it was never actually struck down in court. There was never, a reversal of that legal precedent. There was a mass shift in consciousness, which was good because people saw the horrors of World War II and what the Nazis had done. And then they were like, oh, yeah, this is bad. We shouldn't do this. But then, continued to be racist in this country and have racist policies and continued to have Jim Crow for many years and saw that as not a very, very similar, if not identical thing. And also, they didn't get rid of many of these horrible institutions until the 70s, which was many years after the Second World War. So it is important to realize that even though things are accelerating in a very dangerous direction in this country right now, that many of these philosophies and ideologies that are being pushed by the people in power are actually nothing new. And they are sadly very deeply embedded in this country's history.